between bubble and Dittofi. So what I'm going to do here is just show the difference between, or the similarities between variables and actions in Dittofi, and then workflows and states in bubble. So you can see here that I basically got the same page set up. Again, styling aside, but we're doing the same thing here. We've got a couple of buttons on both sites. This is the Dittofi site. This is the bubble site. And the goal here is to ultimately click the plus and minus, have a counter in the middle, and have that number either increment or decrement based on the buttons that are clicked. So what I'm going to do is kind of show the differences or the way that's done between the two tools. So I'll start off over in the bubble editor. And so the first thing I'm going to do is set a state here on this group. Just simply go to the group, add a new custom state. I'm just going to name this counter. It's going to be a number. And the default value is going to be 0. Okay. And then for my text value, I am going to look for my group counter and do the counter. And so I'm putting that state's value in this text. So over in Dittofi, to do the same thing, I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to add an app variable. I'm going to call this counter. It's going to be a type number. It's going to be set to 0. I'm going to save. I'm going to go into my span here in the settings, and instead of text, I'm going to set it to a variable, and it's going to be counter. Okay. So we'll go back over to bubble, and we'll refresh, and now you can see that we've got a 0 showing up. So in Dittofi, we've got to build the code. So it does take a little bit longer. I'll reload the page, and you can see now that there's a 0. All right, so now for bubble. So the first thing I'm going to work on is the decrement feature, or decreasing by 1. So I'm going to click on this button. I'm going to start edit a workflow. And for this workflow action, I want to go to element actions, and I want to set a state. And it's going to be for the group counter state. And the value I want this to be is group counter -1, right? And so now if I go in and I refresh the bubble page and I decrement, everything should be good. Okay. Now Dittofi, this is where things get a little trickier, I guess I would say. So first thing we want to do is create a front end action, and that action will be tied to our button. So we're going to create a new front end action. We're going to call this action decrement, right? Because we're going to decrease it. Now we need a couple of things in this action. First, we need a value sent to the action. So we're going to call this decrement counter, and this will be a number. And you'll see how all this works in just 1 second. And I need an actual variable in here as well. And we're just going to call this decrement. This will be a number, and I'm going to set this as 1. Okay. And then in the event, there's a few things that have to happen. First, I want to do some math. So I'm going to do some subtraction, and I'm going to take the decrement counter, right, that's going to be passed in, and I'm going to subtract my decrement number, right? So that's the first thing I'm going to do. So I need to save this. And then the next thing I need to do is I need to set the field of a variable. And the variable I want to set is now my counter variable that I created earlier. And the value I want it to be set to is my decrement counter. Okay. Now here's one of the very powerful things with Dittofi that I really like. So if I save this and view the code, now I'm not a programmer by any stretch, but you can kind of see here what's going on. So we're setting a new variable up here. It's going to be passed in and a number, and you'll see how that's done in a second. Then you can kind of see the math that's being done here and what that is putting the new value in the counter state. So I actually liked being able to look at the code quite a bit. But so if I go back and I go to this button, I want to go over to the actions, the add a front end action, and I'm on click. I'm going to do the decrement action. You can see here I've got to pass in a value, and the value I'm going to pass in is my counter value. Okay, so now I want to build my code. That's all building. It's all done. So if I did everything correctly, I should now have a decrement button. And so then to do the same thing, obviously for the other button, we just want to increment that, right? So go to this button, do my start edit workflow. I'm going to go to element actions, set state. It's going to be on my group counter state. And the value is going to be group counter +1 this time. And then if I reload the bubble app, I've got buttons that increment and decrement. So Dittofi, very similar. I need to add a new front end action. And it's going to be just like the other one. We're going to have a input variable. And this is going to be increment counter, the type of number. And then we're going to have an increment variable. And it's going to be a number as well. And it's going to be 1. And so then the first thing I have to do is my math, right? So I need to go in and I'm going to add this time. And the variables I'm going to add are my increment counter. And I'm going to add the increment to it, save. And then I'm going to add another event here, which is going to set the field of counter to my increment counter value. Okay, so I save that, go back to my button, add a front end action. Oh, I didn't rename it, so let's just rename it real quick. Call it increment for consistency's sake. And so now it's increment, and again, the value I'm going to pass to it is counter. And so if I build my code, all right, I'll go reload the page. And now I've got a button that increments and a button that decrements. So you can see very similar ways of doing the same thing. There are a few more steps, certainly with Dittofi. It's very likely that in one of these actions, you could likely do all these steps by just using some custom code. So there's other, and you can run some custom code. But again, the point here was trying to make this all done with the features available without doing any sort of custom code. So hopefully that at least gives you some insight into how similar things are done between the two tools. Thanks.